And hello to everybody out there who's listening. We are going to talk for an hour here about how to get your point across clearly so that influence is achieved, and that can happen in multiple ways. And we're going to go into many ways that it works out. So this is my well. First of all, it's a picture of a nice beach because I figure we all could use a nice beach at this point. I want to just start with this idea that clarity in your idea is the very first piece of gaining influence or making your point heard and action taken. Okay, we're going to talk about that, how clarity leads to empathy. In other words, people who you want to influence need to understand what you're talking about so that they can care about what you're talking about and then take action on whatever it is that you want them to take action on. This is a very simple equation. This works for anything that you're trying to get across. These aren't how-to steps. This is just how it works. And if you think about your life, your professional life, your personal life, we're all looking for the people around us to sort of do things from time to time that we want them to do. So the act of getting other people to do what you want is something that really is a part of every part of your life. I think that often the first step on here, clarity, is really the where it usually falls apart. If they really don't understand what you're talking about, there's just no way for them to care about it enough to take action. And so we're going to look at how that actually works with the types of things that you may want to communicate to your community members. Now, some of you saw me talk last fall at the conference, and I did some of this there, but some of this is new. And I want to just start everybody on the same page with this. Think about someone in your life right now that is either in your life currently or that has been in your life in the past that you would consider to be a great storyteller. So I mean someone that when they talk about what they did last week, they talk about something that they did when they were 12, you just love to listen to it. So I'm going to give you a second to really think of someone. We've all got someone in our mind that you go, man, I really like to listen to that person tell their stories. So think about that person and think to yourself, why is it that I like to listen to this person? What is it that they're doing that is making it appealing to me to listen to them? When I ask this, and you can type in some answers if you want to, and maybe Lindsay can pass them along to me. But as you do that, let me just say, when I ask this of audiences where I'm speaking live, they will often say things like, the person has a sense of humor. The person uses just the right amount of detail. This person draws me into the story, makes me feel like I'm a part of the story. This person uses their voice and their gestures to animate the story and make it more real. This person helps me to visualize what they're talking about. So I hear those kinds of responses quite often when I ask this question, and I think it's great because we all are audience members to our friends and family half the time. Sometimes we're the performer, sometimes we're the audience. We don't really think of it as that, but that's essentially what's going on. We are listening and responding to what this other person is putting across to us. And we all know what it feels like when we're bored and we're distracted and we don't like to listen to someone. So when you do, that's really great information for you when you are in the position of what I'm loosely calling the performer. When it's your time to tell a story, think about, well, what makes me happy? What makes me engaged? And you're going to usually come up with these answers. A good storyteller makes you care, makes you curious, and makes you visualize. So a good storyteller is going to speak in a way that engages you emotionally and intellectually at the same time. In other words, makes you care, makes you go, oh, I know what you're talking about, and I really care. I want to know. The second piece, they make you curious. They don't give away everything in the beginning. This is something that professional presentations often, there's a real sort of, custom, I guess, that we say exactly what we're going to say, and then we say all the things we're going to say, and then we tell everybody what we just said. So there's no curiosity at all. We're going to eliminate that. I say no. Curiosity is one of the greatest things that you can kind of use to your advantage. Making people wonder where you're going with something is great if it's used effectively. Think about TV shows and movies. They make you wonder how it's going to turn out, and so does your good storyteller that you just thought of, I bet. And then the third one makes you visualize. If you think about it, the storytellers that you have imagined just now don't use a PowerPoint when they're telling you a story about something they did when they were 12, right? They just speak in language that inspires you to visualize those things in your mind. In other words, you get to see it. They're not showing it to you with actual visual images. They allow you to see it through the words that they have painted, the language they've used, and the images they painted with words. So I'm talking right now about just straight up storytelling, like somebody telling you a story, okay? And the reason I'm starting with this is I think that when you are trying to gain influence from others, the use of stories, of course, is one of the best ways to do that. And I'm going to get to that a little bit later on. But if you think of it as these same components that go into good storytelling can also be in more professional presentations or conversations that just have a professional subject at hand. These same components can go into it and get people interested. This is really what this entire webinar is about, is getting and holding the interest of those people you're trying to communicate to. They're not just automatically interested. Something I like to sort of put out is that painful reality that everyone is not always listening and caring about every single thing you ever say. We all have things that we say and talk about where we have to work to keep people's interest. There's lots of ways to do that, not just one. I learned this from I and Lindsay referenced my background as a theater artist. I have trained as an actor, been an actor professionally, been a director of plays professionally, and written plays, all of which at their professional level. I currently am still doing it. A production of Romeo and Juliet is running right now that I directed. I do it less and less, but I have developed this particular specialty, which you're looking at on the screen here, of doing one-person shows. So writing a story and then performing that story for an audience. Now, the reason I bring this up is not just it's partly to tell you about myself a little bit, but it's also to say when your objective is to entertain an audience or get them to follow you on a story in a theatrical situation like this is depicting here, there's a lot of things that happen that people don't necessarily know about. When you pay money to go see someone perform, you expect it to be pretty polished, but you also expect it to not really feel like they're working really hard up there. You want it to feel like it's natural. Getting that to happen as a performer, where it feels natural, but it's actually meticulously worked out, that takes a lot of work and time. It takes some talent, but mainly it's really just time, attention, and work. So this one-man show you're looking at right here, this took me a couple of years altogether and many, 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 many drafts of it before I got it to the point where I was just performing it and it looked effortless. Another thing I want to mention about this that relates to the kinds of things that you're dealing with is in doing this show, where it's a one-person show and I'm looking directly at the audience, I can sense when I've got them interested and I can sense when I don't have them interested. Incidentally, something I can't do in this webinar. But when I'm looking right at an audience, I can see in their eyes, they're engaged, they're not engaged, and I can slightly shift my rhythms, my tones, and things like that to help to get those people engaged that aren't. I can just tell from looking at them, and with enough experience, you can too. So it's always being sensitive to where the audience is so that you can slightly shift how you communicate to maintain their interest. In other words, it's not a given. You have to get their interest at the beginning and then have to keep re-earning their interest as you go. This particular show was 2 hours long, so that had to happen quite a few times over the course of that. Now, I've been talking so far about storytelling and what we might consider to be formal presentations. But I know from talking to Lindsay, More often, it sounds like what you are facing is what we might call an informal presentation. So it's more like a conversation, or it is a conversation. So I want to just take a second right now and just look at what's the difference and what's the similarity between a presentation that we would consider to be formal and a conversation which we would consider to be informal. At either end of the spectrum, it's really obvious. A very formal presentation has a PowerPoint, maybe someone on a stage with a podium, and very, very put together. And a conversation on the other end of the spectrum is something that's very loose and you're just free associating and sitting with kind of just talking for a while. Those are obvious, and we can, depending on what you do professionally, you probably do a little of both of those things. What you are dealing with, as far as I understand, is the combination, the blend of both of those things. In other words, where you need to get influence from a quote unquote audience, or a couple of community members or a room full of community members. You need to get them to buy into something that you're talking about, but maybe it's not really a formal presentation setting. Not even like the picture shows. You're not necessarily even standing up in front of them with something on the board. You might just have bumped into them somewhere at the grocery store or whatever. The thing is that if you simply start to converse and talk in just off the top of your head, it might not really achieve the influence you're looking for. So you want to be prepared always with the same degree of preparation and structure. But it's when you are just simply talking with someone at a grocery store, it sort of appears to be more of a conversation. It's more just free flowing, but that you're actually going through certain things in a certain way because you've got the attention of someone that you need to be on board with you. And that attention may only be for 5 or 10 minutes. You don't want to waste it with something that you're saying being too random. So to summarize what I'm saying here is there is a midpoint between formal preparation and totally loose conversation that's really the sweet spot for the type of work that you're doing and trying to influence community members. And that's what I want you to keep in mind. Going forward in this webinar right now, I'm going to talk probably more on the side of the formal presentation. The reason for that is I want you to get in the habit and get into your mind that degree of careful structuring, as though you're going to be presenting formally, will really serve you when you bump into somebody and you need to have the goods right there ready to go to say to them, or you're suddenly in front of 4 people in a conference room, and the moment comes and you really have you can sense that this is a moment I could make influence or not. You want to be ready with a pretty well prepared thing to say. It's what salespeople do all the time. It's what lawyers do, and it's of course what performers do. So that's what we want to look at here. All right, so again, I'm talking from the point of view of story and storytelling, but I'm using the word story in multiple ways. The word story, the concept of story, has been really hot in business and professional endeavors for, the better part of a decade now. You got to speak in stories and tell stories, and a lot of times people don't really even know what they're talking about. They just like the sound of it. So I like to get into what does a story really involve, and how many different types of application of that idea of narrative and story are at our disposal when we really want to exert influence. Okay, so let's look at this here. When you are presenting, and as I just said, presenting can take multiple forms, but let's talk about it as presenting. According to the presenter, the audience wants to know a huge amount of technical information on the subject, a long background on the subject, some things that I just kind of think are interesting to say, some technical detail that I wanted to throw in, and then, hey, got any questions? Now, we've all been on the receiving end of this type of presentation when we just didn't really care all that much. And all of us, and you got to admit, yourself included, probably have given this type of presentation either in a formal or informal way. We tend to think, all right, if I've got something that I know about, and I know lots and lots of detail about it, then of course, my audience wants to know all kinds of detail and technical information too. No, they generally don't. What they want is, how are you going to help me? Or how are you, in the case of nonprofit and the kinds of things you're doing, how are you going to help me help them? There's like a third party user here. That's really mainly what they're thinking about. And if you think about it, you too, when faced with something that is sort of outside your profession or outside your knowledge, you're thinking, but something's being presented to you, you think, well, you're sifting through it going like, how much of this do I need? How is this going to help me do what I need to do? All right. So what I'm trying to get across to you right off the bat here in the beginning of this whole thing is, you must always think about your audience and sit in your audience's shoes and stand in your audience's shoes and think, where's their mindset right now, and how can I speak to that, rather than where's my mindset right now and how can I say what I know. Very different ways of approaching presenting or talking for influence or persuasion. And you must always be thinking of the audience. And this is all they ever care about, guaranteed. Okay. All right. So some of you saw me last fall. Remember this, and I want to just go through this again. So I'm going to take a little bit of a detour right now that we'll get back to what we're talking about. But what I want to do is take a little detour right now through the world of commercial marketing. Okay. Commercial product marketing. This isn't what you're doing. And it isn't really what I'm doing either, but what it is we can learn a lot from how they go about presenting information to an audience that they want buy-in, literal buy-in from. They want you to buy something. All right, so here's a truck. This is a truck, was a new truck a couple years ago, okay? So I have this commercial that I'm gonna show you. Now, if they wanna sell you this truck and they don't even show you this picture, they could just put white piece of paper or a white slide together and give you information on the truck. This is what the truck is. It's got military grade aluminum alloy. It tows 32,500 pounds and etc. on this list here. And if it were true that data and information alone is all you need to be influenced, then we'd never have truck ads. We would just have blank, white sheets of paper with this information, and we would choose our vehicles accordingly. We say, oh, these are the characteristics that I need in my truck, and that's all I need. Well, we of course know that isn't true. If you've ever sat down and watched TV, especially any sports, for any length of time, you know that you conclude that everybody needs a truck because you're just inundated with truck ads. So I'm going to show you one right now, like a 30-second ad. And it has the exact same information in it that you're looking at on this screen, but it's presented a little bit differently.
Anyone like coming in first place in everything that matters? Introducing the all-new 2017 Ford Super Duty, the only high-strength military-grade aluminum alloy body heavy-duty pickup. It takes first place in every measure of towing. Best-in-class towing, best-in-class payload, best-in-class horsepower, and best-in-class torque. Winner, winner, chicken dinner. This is the next level. This is the all-new Ford Super Duty.
All right. So you just saw the exact same information about that truck that you saw on the blank white slide, but it was a little different, right? So clearly what the Ford people, the Ford ad people, they want you to respond to something besides the information. They're wrapping the information up in what I would loosely call a story. And the story is, if you buy this truck, you're going to be part of the group of people that is like this. These are the people that like to work with their hands and lumber, and they stuff like jet airplanes flying at your head, and just that sort of gruff voice of the voiceover. It was Dennis Leary. And, there's a whole atmosphere being built that makes you go, I want to be a part of that. I want to be like that. And incidentally, the truck has all of this information that goes along with making it a valuable truck. Okay, so this is how marketing works in the commercial world that we're all very, very used to just from being citizens of the culture, here's a guy, Seth Godin. If you haven't heard about him, he's generally regarded as a marketing guru. And the first thing that he says in this book and his other, I think, 12 books that he wrote, is that the word marketing has a bad rap because we think of it as manipulation, and we think of it as awful junk mail and things like that. And he's the first guy to say, get away from that. That's not what it is. And you might be thinking, well, this isn't a marketing webinar. This isn't about marketing. Yes, it is. If you're trying to get people to do things that you need them to do, that's marketing. It just doesn't look like, direct mailers in your mailbox, and it doesn't look like ads on TV, but it's the same mentality. And if this book just came out a few months ago, and if you really want to know about how to influence people and how to in a way that is I would say very conscientious and humane and good and all about the right stuff, pick up this book. His basic thesis in this is people like us do things like this. So if you want to gain influence and get people on board with things, you want to first create a sense of us. We are the people that do these things. We are all together, and we sort of have a club, and we think like this or act like this or do these things. And it becomes attractive to the right people to sort of join your club. And he, of course, is far more articulate about it in the book. But essentially, that's the basic idea, is to look for people who that are the right market for you, the right people that you need to influence and talk to, and then speak their language in their terms. See how, once again, I'm turning it into the audience, the people who are listening. You speak their language rather than trying to get them to speak yours. Okay? So this story idea that I'm talking about right now that leads to how to be influential and persuasive in conversations is the foundation underneath this is this idea of the story, the ongoing story. Okay, so let me get into this a little bit here, because it all relates back to what we're talking about as in this webinar. So really, basically, a good story, the story even that maybe the person I said to think of earlier here, that may tell you about something they did last weekend or 20 years ago, that story probably follows this format. Anything you've ever seen on TV or movies follows this format. The good ones, or the big popular stuff, I should say, mainly, follows this basic hero's journey format, where there's a main character introduced at the beginning. That character, it's clear that they want something that they can't seem to get easily. So the main character, you can see on the left there, wants something. The success is over on the other side. In between, there's a problem. There's something that prevents them from easily getting that. And that can be an internal or an external struggle, which I'll talk about in a second. And then in the middle, there's a guide or a helper that comes along with a plan, expertise, empathy, understanding that helps our main character get to success and avoid failure. All right, so we're very familiar with that format. The reason I point this out is because often, accidentally, we who want to, who have information that we want to give, or that we want to help, in your case, a community that you want to change, or a particular community member or leader that you want to influence, we tend to inadvertently position ourselves as the main character. Hi, I have a problem that I want you to help me solve. Now think about that for a second, and think about how that position is often what it comes out as. I have a problem. I want you to help me solve my problem. And here's what we're going to do to help solve my problem. Now, it isn't your problem. It might be the community's problem, but it's the way that you talk about it possibly can make it seem like the person you're talking to is supposed to help you with your problem. And think about how unwilling people generally are to do that. Conversely, if you position them as the main character, you have a problem and I'm here to help you solve your problem. You as a member of your community has a problem, and I or we are here to solve that community's problem. It becomes fundamentally different. And we get back to that idea of people like us do things like this. We are together trying to solve a bigger problem that's outside us, rather than it all being about me, okay? This is the foundation really of how to get influence to happen. So I want you to think for a second right now about who it is that you need to influence. Think about a particular individual or a particular position in a community, and think about how you need to influence them. You want them to help you with something, but think about how that person, and how can you make them the main character? What is their problem that you can help them solve? And really think about that for a minute. If you need to, write it down. Think about who is the main character of the story that you can be the guide in. The Obi-Wan Kenobi is sort of the classic way of looking at it. Okay? The guide in the middle of their story. So the movie examples of this, just to make the point clear, this is a great, simple but very, very effective formulaic Hollywood movie, Rocky, okay, from the 70s. So Rocky is a young guy with a dream. He wants to go the distance in the ring. He can't really he doesn't quite have what it takes to get there on his own. He doesn't have quite the knowledge, so he brings in Mickey the trainer, Burgess Meredith, the older, wiser elder, to help him. But Burgess Meredith can't do it on his own. He has to help. He can't win the thing for him, so Rocky has to do it on his own. Rocky has an external problem, which is he wants to beat Apollo in the ring, and an internal problem, which is, am I good enough? Am I strong enough? Can I do this? Can I prove it to myself? And of course, he goes the distance by the end of the movie. What's interesting is they've taken this formula and stretched it out over a couple of decades. And now we have the Creed movies, where a younger fighter with his own dream and his own wishes and his own internal and external struggle, in his case, it's his father and his legacy of his father. Rocky's now become the guide character. He's shifted over and become the guide to the younger one. Works like gangbusters. But the thing is that we need to see ourselves, when we are the influencers in our professional lives, see ourselves as the trainer, as the helper, and not the main character. All right? So here is an exercise I want you to do right now, and write it down. And I'm going to keep talking for a while, and then we'll come back and see what you've written. Think of something that you need to communicate to your community or to a community member. Okay? And it could be maybe that person or that group of people that I just had you imagine. You know, who can you make the main character? Who do you need to influence? Okay, what needs to be communicated to them? And I want you to try this. Try to write it out right now as simply and clearly as possible. What do you need to communicate? What do you need to happen? If you had them in a room and you only had 1 minute with them, or even less, what would you say? Now I want you to write this down, and we'll take Lindsay will help me see a few of them in a little bit here. There's going to be something revealed in the way you write this that will reveal the way that you think about it, and the way that you're positioning yourself versus positioning them in the whole equation of how you're trying to influence them. Okay? So take a minute and do that.
And as a reminder to everyone, sorry to interrupt you, David, this is the exercise we would love for you to enter into the chat box. And so when you do that, please select that you're sending it to all panelists and attendees so that everyone can see a running list of what you all are writing. So put that into the chat box when you're ready with what your message is.
Okay, great. So we've done that. I'll come back to that and we'll look at those in a minute, all right? All right, so here are some examples from your world. I gave this example last fall, but many of you didn't see that. And even if you did, you might have forgotten by now what we did here. So let's take a look at this. You're familiar with the strategic prevention framework, of course. So this is how this is communicated in the written form. I think this was from either a website or a brochure that a PDF I was given. lots of words, lots of explanation, lots of sort of formal, almost academic description of things, okay? Same thing here. Lots of description and education, and lots and lots and lots of abstraction. Lots of abstract concepts and thoughts. And I'm going to go back to this one again. Look at how much there is. And this is perfectly fine for a PDF as an auxiliary piece of collateral that you leave behind or you give somebody or direct them to. Absolutely nothing wrong with this in the written form, because people can skip around on this and look and pick out what they want. But the mistake or the lost opportunity that often happens is when this kind of thing, this kind of complex concept is attempted to be talked about verbally without giving something for them to read. If someone were to ask you about this, it's really tempting, if you're knowledgeable, like I'm sure all of you are, to just start going through these. Well, assessment, we work with a group assemble that includes representatives from all stakeholders. You know, we talk about it in the abstract and in a way that is very removed from the person that we are trying to communicate it to and ultimately influence. So I'm going to show you maybe a different way, just as a sort of a laboratory example here, on how this maybe could go differently. Go back to this, okay? So how do we take the strategic prevention framework and apply this format to it? And I'll show you what I mean. All right, so let's say this is a faith community, a community leader engagement, okay? So, oops, hang on. So our main character, faith leader, wants to help troubled kids, okay? That's the situation at hand. This faith leader, the faith leader's idea of success will be that kids get help with substance abuse, okay? Now, getting our main character over to that, there's lots of ways to do it. What is this main character's problem? It's not, he or she is not always able to reach them and may also feel inadequate. So you see how I've made this already into an internal and external problem. Like in the example of Rocky, there's the fight, but then there's the internal struggle of how do I deal with myself on the way to succeeding in the fight. So isn't always able to reach them and feels maybe inadequate. So then you come in as the coalition leader or whatever position you may have here with a strategic prevention framework. So now this framework has a context for the person that you are trying to influence to sign on with this. You see what I'm saying? It would be easy to say, okay, faith leader, let me explain this whole thing. And faith leader goes, I don't know how to use that. But if it's put into this context, which is essentially a story context, they go, oh, I see. This is designed to help me with a very specific and personal and urgent issue. So we put this into sentences and it becomes this. Helping you reach the troubled young members of your congregation who struggle with substance abuse can't be done randomly or with nothing but good intentions. That's why we have a solid strategy based on data that is continually reassessed. We start by gaining a deep understanding of the community. Then we get community members involved to develop a plan. Together we put a plan in motion using continual evaluation to keep it effective and sustainable. So I've hit all the parts of the strategic prevention framework, but it's contextualized in a very succinct and clear, simple way with this particular person's problem, okay? It's a couple of extra steps, but it can make a massive difference in how they hear you and whether they go, that sounds like something I want to do, or I don't understand what you're talking about and I can't do it right now, and excuse. Okay? So taking people on a journey moves them to action. Making them go like, I'm here to hold your hand or drive the car or whatever it is to help you on your journey will help them be a big piece of why they say yes versus saying no to something that you are trying to put across. Now, we all know, I'm going to just pause for a second here. You're not salespeople, and I know that. But like I said earlier, there is a real crossover when it comes to trying to be persuasive. between what you do, what salespeople do, and what lawyers do. Okay, there's a real crossover, and excuse me, the fear is always that you're going to get a no. Okay, so it's very human, very common, and totally fine to be a little bit afraid of, like, you know, making yourself in a way kind of vulnerable, putting yourself out there, putting your idea out there, and hearing, no, not interested. Nobody likes that, right? The thing is that the last thing you want to do is avoid going there at all, avoid facing it at all. So you want to, if you can put together a way of talking about the thing that you want them to say yes to, in a way that is speaking their language as much as possible, and being as gracious and empathetic as possible, but also bringing in everything that you want to bring in, just in a context that speaks their language, there's a far better chance you're going to hear yes. And the more times you start hearing yes, the more confidence you get to just, yeah, I'm gonna talk about this in their language in a way that is simple and clear. And you start hearing yes more often, and you want to go forward and do more of it, rather than being afraid you're going to hear no, because, like I say, no one likes that. So let's take a moment here while you're still thinking about, you know, writing out your sentence there, and just talk about really quickly here. I want to talk about what goes into creating a more of a formal presentation, and you can draw out of this what you need for translating that to an informal presentation. So if I'm working with someone on a formal presentation, I would say, well, first of all, we just want to sort of go, okay, what's basically the purpose here? Who basically is it for? How long is it? And et cetera, like that. And then we start just brainstorming. And then after doing some brainstorming, you start grouping that brainstorming into categories. And that's how you get sort of the raw material for what you're going to use for your presentation, if it's going to end up being sort of formal. I just want to draw your attention a little bit to the bottom here, brainstorming and grouping. When you are putting together something that is going to ultimately be a formal presentation, it's really not useful to start working on it in a very logical, methodical, sequential way. Starting at the beginning, going to the next thing, going to the next thing. No, just start throwing out ideas. Get yourself in a room with whiteboards and just write stuff all over as it occurs to you. And write stuff down that feels gut level right, that feels like you just want to say this. Okay, if you can start tapping into what you really love or care about in your subject, and then just write that stuff, even if it's all out of order, you're going to fill the walls or fill the flip charts or even just sheets of paper at a desk with what matters and what you can speak with authority and confidence about. And generally, you're probably going to find that stuff is a lot more interesting than your academic rundown of all the things you know about the subject, but maybe, doesn't fire even you up. If you can't fire yourself up, you're never going to fire them up. I guarantee it. Okay. Then you go, who are they? Who is it that I'm talking to? Exactly who are they? What is if you have a group of people, who's the primary decision maker, and how does that decision maker think? Are they a logic person, or are they a gut feeling person? What do they know about this from the past, their prior knowledge? What problem are they interested in solving? Like I just said about making them a main character. What are they afraid of? What are they afraid of? Seriously, think about what it is that they don't want to happen, that they're desperately wanting to avoid happening, and put it on the table when you're planning. I'm not saying you have to necessarily address it directly with them, but sometimes that is a good idea. Mainly, though, you want to be aware of what is they're most afraid of. And then think, how do they think? Are they a visual person, or are they really going to be influenced by data? And I pause on this for a second to say, don't automatically go, well, obviously they're going to be influenced by data. Because the thing is lots of people aren't. Lots of people are not really all that influenced by data. And also think about, how do you think? If you're a data person, it's easy to think everybody is. If you're an illustrative sort of big picture vision person, it's easy to think everybody is. Think about the fact that probably everyone doesn't think like you, and you have to speak two languages, either theirs or yours and theirs, to get it across. If you just speak your own language and speak to what influences you only, I just about guarantee you're going to miss half the time, if not all the time. All right. What's the problem you're presenting? What's the solution that you're presenting? Okay. So, and then we go into what's the key message, what's the objective. These are more formal presentation stuff, but think about how you can apply this to informal as well. Okay, check it out. The key message, what's your main point in one simple sentence? And this gets around to what I just asked you to do here. So for instance, this strategy will decrease substance abuse in 3 distinct ways. So that's a key message that runs through everything you're going to say if you're doing say a 20-minute presentation on something. That's sums it up pretty succinctly. Then the objective, what do you want and what are you going to do for them? Okay, so what do you want? I want investment from the leader. But see how I've got 2 pieces to this here, because the other half of it is what are you going to do for them in the presentation? In other words, if they just sense, if they're the leader, say, and they sense that the only thing going on in this room is that presenter up there or that person sitting across the table wants my investment, you're probably not going to get it. It's like a car salesman. Do you buy a car from the car salesman that says, that seems to kind of exude, I want to sell you a car. I want you to buy a car. Buy a car from me because I want you to buy a car. You don't buy a car from that person. But if that person is just helping you make a decision and you get the sense that it's okay if you don't buy a car from them, most likely you're probably going to keep going back to that salesperson because they're trying to help you with your life. So the professional presentation version of that is what I put on the screen here. I will equip the leader with the tools they need to take the first steps with the strategy. So see what you're doing for them is you're helping them by giving them tools to take steps with something. You're perceiving that they need something, they need tools, and you're going to provide them. Rather than just, I want you to do this thing. Okay? That's easy, but very ineffective. So we're back to this. So Lindsay, do we have any people who have written anything in on what needs to be communicated?
We do. We actually have a number of things to choose from here. So thank you, everybody, for participating in this exercise. I will read some of them to you, David. If you want to view them, you can select the chat icon in your menu. So something Laura wants to communicate is that Candy, Ohio County residents turned in 117 pounds of unused prescription drugs last Saturday during the National DEA Take Back Day.
I think I got that one. Yeah. Okay. All right. So Laura, what is it that, what I'm not seeing in this is, so that's something that needs to be communicated. Is there something that you want from them? Is there a result you're looking for? So in other words, and
Laura responded to that and said just awareness.
Okay, so this is a great place to start with this, Laura and everybody. If your only objective is awareness, I strongly advise you to go back and revise that objective, because awareness is pretty inert. If you just say, I'm saying this so that people know a thing, then it's really, really easy for people to ignore that and go, okay, whatever, I don't, yeah. Laura, maybe try and do this again and say, I'm going to read it again. Candy, Ohio residents turned in 170 pounds of unused prescription drugs last Saturday during the National DEA Take Back Day. Okay? Write the sentence with something in it that says what that means to the community. So in other words, insight or an angle or an opinion that you feel will resonate. I don't know how fast you can do that.
Maybe while Laura's doing that, we can select another one that has a particular audience in mind.
Yeah.
Lynette wrote that her audience is people who are at a community dinner for her coalition. And so she wrote, reducing underage drinking benefits individuals, families, communities, and our whole county.
That's good, yeah. That's very simple and very clear, and does have an angle in it. Reducing underage drinking benefits individuals. So if I was to take this and sort of treat this as the key message piece of the presentation thing I just did for you, can you, Lynette, do that and say, add one more piece of information to this? So you've said reducing underage drinking benefits individuals, families, communities, and our whole county. Can you add another piece that says, because of da-da-da-da-da, reducing underage drinking benefits? So in other words, give us a little more to go on about why it benefits the individuals. What I'm getting at with both of these so far is it's very easy to have these, what you think of as simple communication, leave a little bit too much up to the imagination of the listener. And by leaving imagination is a great thing, and I'm going to talk about that in a moment here. But if you leave too much kind of gray area or space, it's really easy for people to either fill in the wrong reason, or to reject your idea, or to just lose interest, okay? So keep these little pieces of communication should be positioned to get people to go, really? Okay, tell me more. Which that one, Lynette, actually sort of does, but I just thought, let's throw in a little bit more information.
David, would you like to do one more?
Yeah, one more.
We have about 10 minutes remaining on the webinar, so I want to be mindful of that. Lori wrote that her audience is superintendents, and actually I think Becca wrote something kind of similar, a school staff audience. And what they both want to communicate is that their Minnesota student survey results influence activities which engage your students and community. Becca's was that she wants school staff to understand the importance of students taking that survey.
Okay. Yeah, again, I would say that's good. It's clear. It's simple. Give me something in that makes me go, that, and by give me, I mean, I mean, right in there, something else that says, that gives me a little bit more to work with. So your MSS survey results influence activities to engage your students and community by da-da-da-da-da-da-da. By showing us such and such, by whatever. Just something that identifies a little bit more about why it does the thing you're saying it does. That's what I'm challenging you to do actually is the more challenging piece. It's to say, because all I gave you in the instruction was something that needs to be communicated. And that was intentionally kind of open-ended to see where people went with it. Because the piece that is a little bit more tricky is to succinctly zero in on the angle as well as the information. So far, a lot of these are, this is the information, this is a fact. You also want to have it be the effect of the fact, or my opinion on the fact, is also contained in the language, which we can work on in the private sessions, which Lindsay will tell you about in a little bit. My thing, as you can see on the stamped on the bottom of every slide, is simple message. So that's my whole company right now, is devoted to simplifying complicated stuff in language. Did we get another? Oh, so Lynette wrote back, teens who do not use alcohol are healthier and better. Students, employees have a higher graduation rate and grow to be better citizens. That's exactly what I'm talking about, Lynette. Yeah, there's more going on in that sentence. You didn't basically take any more time, barely any more words, and you said a lot more that makes me curious to have you talk more about that subject, which is precisely what you want. And did we get another one from Laura? Helping us to understand our local needs and work. Okay, so we can, yeah, we should probably move on, Lindsay, okay?
I think so. Yep, sounds good.
Okay, so I'm going to flip to the next slide here. Stories, using the more like a story that is an illustration of the idea, okay? So, for example, I got to move my thing here. Oops. Officer Bob needs to be convinced that working with the coalition is a good idea. Now, it's easy to go up to Bob and say, Bob, the coalition is a good idea, and you should work with us because here's the data that says you should work with us. And Bob, I really want you to, and come on. And then Bob says, no, 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 no. So how do you get through to Bob when you really need his buy-in? And I'm suggesting one of many ways is to start building a relationship with Bob by telling him a case study, okay? So you say, in another community that we worked with, law enforcement would break up parties of teenagers and underage drinking, give them tickets, and get them home safe. And what happened as a result of that was parents would complain about the kids getting punished and getting tickets. Okay, so Bob goes, yeah, all right, yeah, I know. Well, the coalition held classes with members of the community and told them how their kids could stand a greater chance of success in avoiding addiction and substance abuse with clear rules and consequences. So the coalition identified that the problem could be that the tickets and punishment were going to feel like, you know, punitive. And they said, here's actually our angle on it. Here's the story behind it. Here's what it really is, and got into more detail. And then parents wanted the police to break up parties and give tickets because they understood more. Now, that third point here is not necessarily just education happening. It's stories and anecdotes and illustrations within. What I'm telling you about right here, though, is that if Bob is your objective, that you want Bob on board, tell him this story that's down here. That's a story. There was a problem. We had a solution. And Bob might go, oh, now that makes a little more sense. Tell me more. Again, this is not all complete until, you know, this is about getting your listener, the person you're trying to influence, to actually ask you to just go further with stuff and elaborate. All right, so now another little exercise for you all. So coalition coordinators need to get community members on board with more than one way to solve substance abuse. Members of the community currently only think that warnings of negative outcomes will motivate young people. Okay, so they just think, all right, tell them how horrible their life's going to be, and that's all we ever need to do. And you're sitting there going, no, there's a lot of other ways to do it, but now how do you handle that situation? Okay, you know that there are several ways to control substance abuse, changes to access and availability and social norms, for example. But this person just keeps saying, yeah, but yeah, all we need to do is just tell them how bad their life is going to be, and that's all we need to do. And you say, no, there's other things we could. How do you handle that? And I'm going to suggest one of the ways you could do that is to tell a story, like I just did about when we're talking to Bob, the law enforcement man. Tell a story of positive outcome from one of these other ways of doing it. So before this, even before this person stands up and says, no, I don't need any of this other way of doing stuff, I got my way, even before they do that, you can head it off at the pass and say, I know that there is one way there is one tool that you have to handle substance abuse, which is scare kids about what's going to happen to them. That works for some kids some of the time. What if you had more tools? What if there were more ways of getting at this problem than just the one? Let's see what happens if maybe we do changes to access, changes to availability or social norms. And for example, we worked with a community one time where that worked out, and here's that story. So right now, another little exercise here in the webinar, think of a story of this exact thing that I have up on the screen, changes to access, availability, and social norms, that you could tell as an illustration of how to go beyond negatives and warnings as the only way to control it. And while you're doing that, I'll tell you a story. So as I said before, I have worked quite a bit with lawyers. And lawyers have a unique situation going on where they need to educate a jury on sometimes extraordinarily complex issues. I've worked quite a bit with medical malpractice, so there's a lot of medical stuff going on. How do they get all that to a jury who can be comprised of people with really just high school education, some of them PhDs, some of them, sixth grade education. You never know what you're dealing with. How do we speak one language to all of them and get them to all be on board? And my answer is speak in images and speak in stories that will contain contain the same types of information, just in a different form. So for example, I worked on a case that was about a plaintiff whose husband had died of lung cancer against big tobacco. Okay, so our lawyer could have stood there and said, nicotine addiction results from binding of nicotine to receptors in the brain. Nicotine causes changes in the brain that make it extremely difficult to quit smoking. And the cigarette companies manipulated the levels of nicotine by various means, including selective production of tobacco and blah, 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 blah about that, which incidentally, he did end up doing some of that, but not first. The first thing that I advised him to do, which is what he did, is told a little, very, very brief, but very laser focused and precise depiction in words of addiction of this particular man. And it went like this. A 57-year-old man sits alone in his kitchen one night at 3 a.m. and he's smoking a cigarette, and in front of him is an ashtray overflowing with cigarette butts. His wife walks into that kitchen at 3 a.m. and looks at him and says, honey, what are you doing? And he looks up at her with tears in his eyes, and he says, I have tried so hard to quit and I just can't. So right there is a depiction of addiction and his hopeless dependency on cigarettes. Now that alone is not going to influence a jury to award millions of dollars. But that type of thing repeated throughout this opening statement, in addition to the data and facts, did get them to award millions of dollars at the end of that trial. So it works like a little bit of imagery goes a really long way. That little story I told you about that guy smoking wasn't even a minute long, but I bet you all can visualize it in your mind. So using that same idea, tell me a couple of stories from your own experience with it. Do we have enough time, Lindsay, or is it too late now?
We actually are running late on time. We are just a little bit over. So I think we're going to have to skip the exercise. But I hope that those of you who've taken a moment to think about that will actually be inspired to participate in the other sort of part 2 that we're going to tell you about in just a minute. So if we can wrap up, David, that would be awesome.
Yeah, I just flashed my other slides here by you. Remember, this is how it works. And you can get in touch with me many ways. Lindsay's going to tell you about a special thing that I'm going to offer a small group of you if you sign up for individual coaching on this. So go ahead, Lindsay, and tell us about that.
Yeah, so on the screen right now, you see the information for the part 2 of Persuasive Confidence. You've likely seen some stuff come out about this already, but this is what we're calling the personal coaching cohort. So some of what David has already done today in asking you to think of how to communicate something simply and then the feedback that he was able to offer, this cohort will be provided that same kind of feedback, but personalized and customized to you. So for scenarios that you're coming up against in your work that you would like to prepare something for, whether that is informal or formal, as David was talking about earlier, maybe you're preparing to go speak to the folks at that community dinner, or you are preparing for those stories that you want to have in your back pocket, like David was talking about earlier. What are they so that you can be prepared to talk to community members in that way when you run into them at the grocery store or wherever in your community? So this opportunity is still available for you to sign up for. It's open for only 10 to 15 participants, and it begins May 20th. The way it will work is that you will go for 4 weeks David will give you an assignment each week, and then you are able to complete that on your own schedule throughout each week. So it's only $50 to participate, and the details are available at the link that you see on the screen. Anything else you want to add about this opportunity, David?
Well, just keep in mind that these little exercises are going to be very brief, very easy to do, and you can do them in your own time. You'll do them, upload your video, I'll see it on a different time and give you feedback. So it's designed to be very user friendly and not tremendously time consuming, while giving you a huge amount of impact on just your specific and particular issue that you're dealing with communicating messages.
Fantastic. Yeah, so take a look at that. Those details are on our website, and registration is still open. I want to share with you just a couple of other things. If you'll go to the next slide, David, there's also some additional learning opportunities coming up from us in the next couple months. So our substance abuse prevention skills training is still open for registration for the one coming up in about a month, as well as our ethics and prevention training. So take a look at that. And then if you'll go to the next slide, we also want to just put in a plug for this year's conference. That's where many of you saw David last fall. The conference this year will be October 24th and 25th in Duluth, and registration opens June 11th. Finally, there's just one more slide. We think it's really, if you'll click one more time, I think there's an animation here. We think it's really important to take what you've learned today and be able to turn it into something that you're doing in your work, right? That's the idea here. And if you'd like some support with those next steps, with thinking about how what you took away from today, how you might apply that to the scenarios in your actual work, we encourage you to get in touch with your regional prevention coordinator. They are the folks that kind of work alongside with Minnesota Prevention Resource Center, and they're available to offer you that in-person one-on-one support that way as well. So we encourage you to get in touch with them. If you haven't already met yours, or if you're actively working with yours, give them a call, send them an email, and turn what you've taken away from today into something that is applied in your work. With that, I want to say thank you to everybody for participating today. Thank you for sticking with us a little bit after our time. And thank you so much, David, for everything that you've shared with our audience. This was really great. I think really relevant. I hope relatable to everybody. So thank you so much for your time today.
Well, you're welcome. It's my pleasure. And I look forward to working with a few of you going forward here.
Sounds great.